So we've had 3 talks from people who know what they're talking about. I don't really. So I'm a solutions architect, right? And I'm going to talk about cryptocurrency. I am not a cryptocurrency expert, but I have been working with a fintech on some potential future models for them working with smart contracts. In the process of that, I've learned some things about economics and about cryptocurrencies that are really quite interesting. I just hope I'm right about some of it. If there's any cryptographers in the audience, I'd like to apologize. I'm going to call cryptocurrencies crypto, and I know that annoys some cryptographers. So I have got some experience with cryptocurrencies. I started mining Bitcoin right back at the very beginning because it was cool, and I deleted some, which I didn't care about until like Christmas, where they were worth about $20,000 each. I started digging through my old hard disks to see if I could find them, but I couldn't, which is a shame. If I'd found them, I'd have been $40,000 richer. I also invested in a thing called the DAO, which many of you may not have heard of, but that was a whole smart contract-based thing, and all the stuff got stolen on the first day it launched. I eventually got some of my money back, but Bitcoin had gone up so much in that time, I made money out of being stolen from. It was remarkable. So I'm going to start with the theory of money. We've already seen one of my slides, although I think mine's got more color in it, which is what actually is money. So there are 4 things here. You can see in 1875, William Stanley Jevons famously came up, this is the Wikipedia page, came up with a medium of exchange, a common measure of value, a standard of value, and a store of value, which somebody summarized as money is a matter of functions for, a medium, a measure, a standard, a store. Isn't that smart? So what you find is that each of these things is important, but people talk about different ones depending on what they want to focus on. Medium of exchange it needs to be sort of convenient, and you need to be able to tell that something's authentic. So if somebody gives you a pound, you can tell that it's a pound. A store of value needs to be something practical. I've seen a suggestion you could use plutonium for money because it would encourage people to spend, because you don't want to keep it in your pockets. Douglas Adams invented, if you remember the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a thing called a ningy, which was a triangular rubber coin 6,800 miles along each side, which is quite impractical. So generally, currencies have been chosen because they fulfill all of these functions. Now, standard of value is one that is not that often talked about. You hear a lot about medium of exchange, and a lot of store of value if you hang around crypto people, and there is a reason for that. Standard of value, however, is extremely important. Here are some examples of standard of value being maintained in the past. The Code of Hammurabi from 1754 fixed prices for a whole bunch of stuff, in particular bread, there's a theme in fixing prices and bread throughout history. The Chinese in 1122 did the same thing. I'd never even heard of these guys till I Googled. The Laggid dynasty in the 306 BC in Egypt, they tortured people who sold bread at the wrong price, and so did King John in 1202. So that's one way of fixing a standard of value, is torturing people who sell things at the wrong price, right? However, that is these days considered to be somewhat barbaric. And in fact, fixing prices is terribly communist or something, I don't know. We're not supposed to do it anymore. So instead, we control the price of money itself. And you'll see this across all governments pretty much. Anyone who's got their own currency, they aim for this 2% inflation. And you may well have heard about this if you read the news. And that's pretty much all central banking cares about these days, is just hitting this 2% inflation, right? Now, they're not stupid. That is because that matters more for currency than absolutely everything else, right? In 2018, that is actually the most important thing, because all the other stuff's been largely solved. Some of you may... there we go. So, why does it matter? Why are central banks controlling this? Well, once upon a time, maybe all money was for was I go and buy the bread, buy it at the right price, don't get tortured, and that was it. That was all the contract was. But these days, contracts extend over very long periods of time. So things like employment contracts, where you get paid every month, or mortgages that last over decades. If you've got a mortgage for 25 years, you kind of want the money to be worth kind of the same over that period. You don't want it going up and down, because that's just horrible, right? I'm old enough to have lived through very high interest rates, and my parents didn't enjoy it. So there are loads of financial instruments that extend over long periods of time and that really depend on this standard of value being important. Here's, from my title, this is the time machine that I was talking about. I'm not going to take you through time, but with finance, things like mortgages, we can travel through time. You want to buy a house, you don't have the money, well, you can go to a bank and you can kind of teleport all this money from your future into the present, right? You know, this money just travels through time and suddenly, you know, you've got hundreds of thousands of pounds to go and buy a house with, which is incredibly commonplace. You don't really think about it, but actually it's a spectacular piece of engineering. And our entire financial system relies upon the fact that those things work. So I have to scroll my notes because my words are too big. And it's remarkable, actually, and it's something that it was not accessible to most human beings over the entirety of history, right? It's a very, very recent invention. So, that's a bit on the theory of money. Cryptocurrencies. Now, I am not going to explain how cryptocurrencies work. There's a really good YouTube, it's 5 minutes long, you can just go and watch that. I only have, I don't know how much time I've got left. I only have some time left. 5 minutes, bloody hell, really. Right, I'll talk really quickly. So, in fact, I'll just skip over that slide. So, how well do cryptocurrencies function according to our four factors of currency, right? Exchange of value, ever tried buying anything with Bitcoin? It's a bit rubbish, actually. It could take a really, really long time. I wouldn't go to the bar and spend Bitcoin because you'll have finished your beer long before the transaction finishes. But other cryptocurrencies do work more efficiently. Store of value, it's actually spectacularly good, really. You know, it doesn't take up much room. It doesn't decay. That's pretty good. Measure of value, it's fine. It's easy to identify. You can chop them up into tiny bits, actually, which is quite good. Standard of value. Bitcoin roller coaster guy. Bitcoin's been all over the place. In 2013, a Bitcoin was 60 cents. In 2016, it was $600. This Christmas, it was $20,000, and it's now $6,000. If you've ever used the Windows copy dialog, that's up and down and up and down. You have no idea what it's going to be worth. So, there are no price stability mechanisms at all in cryptocurrencies, right? There's no central banks. There's nobody aiming for 2% inflation in Bitcoin. There's nobody to do it, right? There's also widespread market manipulation. That's basically why the price keeps changing, as far as I can tell. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible currency, really. You would never, ever take out a mortgage in Bitcoin. You would be insane to do that. Absolutely. You wouldn't even take a job paid in Bitcoin because who knows how much you'd earn at the end of the month. Completely random, right? So you can see why crypto people keep talking about exchange and store as those are the two key factors of currency, because this one they really, really can't hack. But it gets better. So there are these things called smart contracts. Now these are really, really, really smart, right? And again, I'm not going to explain how they work because it's really complicated. But basically, these are accounts within a cryptocurrency network that instead of having their value set by people performing transactions, they determine their own value based on executing code, right? So in theory, you can take a contract and write it all out in code and wrap it up inside these accounts, and then they can execute the contracts entirely autonomously ideally without need to access the legal system whatsoever, right? They have a true value, which is determined by the code itself. Now, there's a widespread implementation of this on Ethereum, which is where I got all my DAO stuff stolen because the code was broken. They're really, really smart, actually, absolutely fascinating. And they do potentially have a life-changing role in the future, but they do have some significant challenges. So contracts are interesting in themselves. So if you read the literature around smart contracts, they're full of stuff like this, right? Somebody buys a thing from somebody else, boom, contract, done. Although, actually, this one's quite hard. If you're inside a cryptocurrency network and you've bought this box from the man on the right, how do you know when the person on the left has received the item, right? The smart contract doesn't know this. It's not magic, it's just running code, okay? And in real life, you don't tend to exchange the money at the exact moment you receive the goods. You often pay in advance, and you get the goods later. That's a pretty common model, right? You're actually extending credit to the supplier for this short period of time, okay? And what you'll find is that credit is absolutely everywhere. Every contract actually is full of lurking credit that you don't really think about as credit. All of those kinds, you probably know what most of them are, except for bailment, which is where you leave your car with a valet. That's bailment. They're not allowed to go and do donuts on M1. They're only allowed to be a valet. So if you hire something, or like say you leave your car with a valet, the contract will say that they pay damages, right? What that means is really that you're extending some kind of credit to them, in that if they take the car and steal it, they will pay you the money back, right? And seriously, every single contract you look at has this, and this is one of the exercises I went through, was reviewing these commercial contracts to see how you might model them in code. And the answer is you really, really need a solution for credit. Now, unfortunately, credit's really hard. I'll go back in. So contracts rely ultimately on legal enforcement. When you go and hire a car from someone and you promise to pay the damages, they don't check you've got the money. They don't say, "Oh, give me 50 grand to cover the cost of the car just in case." They might take an impression of your credit card for 300 quid, but that'll be about it, right? Nobody expects you to have all the money available. And that's because, in the end, men with guns will come and take the money from you, right? That's like the fundamental part of the social contract, is that somebody's got men with guns. Now, that is the bit the cryptocurrency people really didn't like, right? The whole men with gun things. There's a whole political dimension to it, and they didn't like that. Or at least they didn't like anyone else having guns. So there is a solution to this, and this is kind of how it works in the smart contract world, is something called tokens. So here's one way you might do this. You have somebody who wants a mortgage, right? Very long-term contract. They need it in fiat currency. They want dollars because they want to give it to someone who's selling a house, and the person selling a house doesn't want any weirdo currency. So they've got to go and borrow that money. The bank is able to issue a smart contract that pays out over the term of the mortgage. But it can't pay out in real currency because it would have to contain all of that currency to be able to prove that it's got the money, right? So the fundamental issue is these contracts have to contain everything that they're going to pay, right? So instead, you create a new token. The bank creates a brand new token and says it's my bank token, and you denominate the mortgage in that, and then you can invent them because they're yours, right? You become a sovereign currency issuer. Now, in theory, if you go right into the crypto woo, every human being can become a sovereign of their own currency, but I doubt that'll happen. But I could totally imagine banks doing it, right? And there's quite a lot to be said for this, actually, as a concept. 1 minute. 1 minute, right? Very quickly. So what would happen if we did this, right? If this were the future? Well, we do have some idea, because there's this thing called asset-backed commercial paper. Mortgages used to be financed through retail savings, so you went to the bank and people had deposited money, they used that money to go and give you the money for houses. About 20 years ago, banks started using something called asset-backed commercial paper, where they would go and they'd give you the mortgage, they'd go and resell packages of mortgages on a repurchase market, right? And they'd use the assets to back this commercial paper, and they'd get loans off the back of that, right? It was quite effective up until 10 years ago this year. That on the left there is the Royal Bank of Scotland, who started doing this. You can see when they started doing it, because it made them very, very valuable right up until the music stopped. And yeah, Northern Rock as well, who actually were a perfectly decent bank. It was a bit of a shame that they got stiffed. So there are kind of two lessons from this in a way, because the first one is it could be an absolute disaster, right? But the flip side is, in a way, this has already happened once, right? This has proved the model that you can effectively issue new currency. This is the kind of model smart contracts would use. And it did work for quite a long time. And in fact, the reasons that the market seized up are still quite complicated and disputed. There were certainly some bad actors, but a lot of banks like Northern Rock were perfectly legitimate, really. They just suffered when, like I said, the music stopped and the money stopped being spent. So there are fundamental questions about price stability and cryptocurrencies generally, which I think may completely undermine them. And I think what we see in cryptocurrencies is the attempt to recreate some of these institutions that they were initially attempting to escape from. And it would be particularly ironic, I think, if we ended up with the successful cryptocurrencies being ones that worked exactly like the fiat currencies they tried to replace. And I think they will need to grow them to be able to work. And this is particularly important for smart contracts to work, because otherwise there would be no way of trusting these intermediate tokens. So that's sort of a view into how perhaps smart contracts and cryptocurrencies might function in the future. And I hope I got it right, because it's really complicated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And sorry to nag you on time there.
It's fine. It worked out pretty well, actually.
It did. Good.
Yeah.
We have overrun this session a little bit, so we're going to do the panel session with the questions offline, and we're just going to finish up with a couple of questions for Doug, if I may. I think, and that was sort of affectionately disparaging.
Yes.
To say. The incentives are there for some of this to work, and some of the ingredients that could make cryptocurrencies work and become more prevalent are there. What, for you, is the big barrier that needs to change, the big thing that is going to lead to actually widespread adoption?
I think there's a number of them. So some of them are operational, in that it's actually quite hard to use still, and most of that is technological problems. But more fundamentally than that is the reasons that people do it in the first place, I think. Because if we do go down this model and you end up replacing fiat currencies with what are effectively just new fiat currencies, then what really is the point, right? Because I kind of love cryptocurrencies in a bit of a weird way, because they're so clever, right? It's just amazing to see maths kind of harnessed in that way, right? And that's an enormous attraction for many of the early adopters, right? But that just makes it a bit weird, right? It doesn't make it a fantastic product. It just means that early adopters like it. So what would be the motivation for, the laggards, the main bulk of people to even want to use it? The reason it got broadly adopted briefly last year was because people thought they'd get rich quick, but that never happens, right? That doesn't happen for everyone to get rich. That's impossible.
I guess a kind of counterfoil to that might be Bancor, which is a crypto organization that does very, very similar sort of community currencies, raised 150 million the year before last in ICO, and now prints money in Africa that gives appreciating value in local communities. So that's like a really practical, tangible use case.
Yeah. What you generally find with the practical use cases is you could probably have done it without the crypto, actually.
They did. They were doing it without crypto before, but now they're switching to blockchain because it's a more efficient way of doing it.
That might not be the reason they're doing it. It might be because it was easier to raise money.
It helps you raise 100
Yeah.
Okay. I guess... I forget what I guess.
I can't help.
Somebody help me with a really interesting cryptocurrency question to lead us into lunch, please. That really sums up the state of cryptocurrency in New York. My apologies for my mind blank at the very end there. Please put your hands together. Thank Doug and our whole panel, please. Thank you.
Thank you.